Breaking! The president has not nominated his henchman to a seat on the Third Circuit. He has not tapped his hand-picked enforcer to tip the balance in a court that sits over Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. He has not rewarded a crony for politicizing the Justice Department, and he has not nominated someone temperamentally unfit and wholly unqualified for a lifetime spot on the bench. Just ask this guy.
I am not anybody's henchman. I'm not an enforcer. I'm a lawyer from a small town.
You know, if you have to announce that you're not a henchman, you're just a simple country lawyer, well, people are going to ask questions because it kind of implies that a whole lot of people think you are a henchman, and they might have a point. On May 28th, President Trump posted, "It is my great honor to nominate Emile Beauvais to serve as a judge on the United States Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit. Emile is a distinguished graduate of Georgetown Law and served as Assistant U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York for nearly a decade, where he was the co-chief of the Terrorism and International Narcotics Unit. Emile is smart, tough, and respected by everyone. He will end the weaponization of justice, restore the rule of law, and do anything else that is necessary to make America great again. Emile Beauvais will never let you down." But Beauvais was a familiar figure to everyone who followed the progress of Donald Trump's criminal cases, and most of them were skeptical that Emile Beauvais will never let you down or give you up or run around and desert you. Beauvais is being nominated to the Third Circuit, which covers Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. It is not normal to nominate someone who has zero connection to the jurisdiction where he'll sit, but normal is many miles in the rear view at this point. In any event, Beauvais is indeed a graduate of Georgetown Law, and he served as an assistant U.S. attorney at the Southern District of New York. He was, by all accounts, a competent, hard-charging prosecutor. His office filed narco-terrorism charges against Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, Russian and Chinese spies, and a Hezbollah operative. But his tenure had at least two significant black marks. The first involved the spectacularly botched prosecution of a businessman named Ali Sadr for violating sanctions on Iran. After the jury convicted Sadr, prosecutors supervised by Beauvais realized that they'd neglected to turn over a key piece of evidence. And when they discovered it, instead of handing it over immediately, they decided to wait until tomorrow and bury it in some other documents. That is wildly unethical. Prosecutors have a duty to turn over to the defendant and his lawyer any information they discover that could tend to show a defendant is innocent. They got caught, and Beauvais and attorney Sean Crowley, who led the Terrorism and International Narcotics Unit with him, came off pretty badly in the court filings. In text to each other, Beauvais admitted that his subordinates had told a flat lie to the court, but on the witness stand, Beauvais claimed to have been unaware of the document. The verdict was vacated and Sadr was never retried. Funny enough, Crowley wound up representing E. Jean Carroll in her defamation and sexual assault case against Donald Trump. But that wasn't the only time Beauvais' leadership skills were called into question. Politico reported in February that Beauvais' treatment of his colleagues was so abusive that an internal investigation recommended that he be demoted. Quote, "He belittled the work of his subordinates, was unusually tough on law enforcement agents, and after one blowup, refused to speak with a colleague for years and declined to make eye contact even if the two were alone in an elevator." In 2022, Beauvais left the Southern District of New York for private practice, where he soon teamed up with former big law attorney Todd Blanche, who had set up a bespoke law firm with one client, Donald Trump. Blanche and Beauvais mounted an extremely aggressive defense of Trump in his criminal cases, which is appropriate. But there's a fine line between zealous advocacy and misconduct, and Blanche and Beauvais got themselves on the wrong side of it more than once. During the false business records case brought by the Manhattan District Attorney, Blanche and Beauvais repeatedly spouted false claims of prosecutorial misconduct. On the eve of trial, they demanded that the case be dismissed and the prosecutors sanctioned based on, quote, "widespread misconduct and improper and unethical actions, violating discovery rules." Essentially, they accused the state of doing the exact thing Beauvais' underlings did back in SDNY, but this time on purpose. It was a highly inflammatory allegation, and it was also a lie. The district attorney did not violate the discovery rules. He handed over those documents immediately after receiving them from the Justice Department. New York Supreme Court Justice Juan Merchan was flabbergasted. He said, "You are literally accusing the Manhattan District Attorney's Office and the people involved in this case of prosecutorial misconduct and trying to make me complicit in it." The people, that is the prosecutors, went so far and above what they were required to do that it's odd we're even here. But Beauvais and Blanche didn't quit. They continued lobbing baseless accusations that the Manhattan prosecutors were taking orders from the Biden White House to torpedo Trump's electoral prospects. After Trump was convicted on all counts by the jury, Justice Merchan scolded Bovee and Blanche for using language, indeed rhetoric, that has no place in legal proceedings, and said they'd come dangerously close to crossing the line of zealous representation and the professional advocacy one would expect from members of the bar and officers of the court. In the election interference case in D.C., Bovee and Blanche continued the pattern of attacking the prosecutors for illegally coordinating with the White House. They accused the Justice Department of retaliating against President Trump for speaking out or exercising his constitutional right for office and doing President Biden's impermissible bidding. In one particularly egregious passage, they accused Joe Biden of punishing Trump for declaring his candidacy by appointing special counsel Jack Smith to take over the cases against him. In reality, the special counsel regulations require the Attorney General to appoint an outside prosecutor if a case involves a conflict of interest. So when Trump declared his candidacy, he became Biden's rival, and A.G. Garland had no choice but to appoint a special counsel. Blanche and Bovee knew that, and it was egregious bad faith to claim in their filings that Biden ordered Garland to do it, which is why Judge Tanya Chutkan called them out for a pattern of defense filings focused on political rhetoric rather than addressing the legal issues at hand. She said it was not only unresponsive and unhelpful to the court, but it was also unbefitting of experienced defense counsel and undermining of the judicial proceedings in this case. In both these cases, Bovee and Blanche fought court-imposed gag orders tooth and nail. They said that Trump's constant tweeting about judges and witnesses was core First Amendment speech, even if those tweets caused a deluge of death threats for the judges, their families, and court staff, which they did. In November of 2024, Trump won re-election to the White House, and the case in D.C. was dismissed since the Justice Department can't prosecute a sitting president. Once he was back in the White House, Trump put Blanche and Bovee in charge of the Justice Department under Attorney General Pam Bondi, another of his personal lawyers. The guys who had just spent 2 years screaming that the DOJ was being weaponized for political ends promised that they were going to return the department to its rightful mission of delivering blind justice. Spoiler alert! Trump named Bovee as Principal Associate Deputy Attorney General, or PADAG, a position which does not require Senate confirmation. So Bovee was on the job before Blanche and Bondi got there. And one of the first things Bovee did was to implement a purge of FBI officials who investigated the Trump supporters who laid siege to Congress on January 6, 2021. In fact, before leaving DOJ, Bovee himself had worked on January 6 cases, but he said, "I do not believe the current leadership of the Justice Department can trust these FBI employees to assist in implementing the president's agenda faithfully." An additional 24 prosecutors at the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. who worked on the January 6 cases were also fired immediately, while other senior officials were demoted to doing first-year misdemeanor intake, a transparent effort to get them to quit. Bovee demanded a list of every FBI agent in the country who had worked a January 6 case, numbering in the thousands. He promised that he wasn't doing a purge, he was just seeking out anyone who acted with corrupt or partisan intent. Now, Bovee's targeting of civil servants was a gross abuse of power, but none of us is immune to being targeted in our private lives. It's important to zealously guard your privacy, including your home address and private information, which is data brokers' stock in trade. In case you're not familiar with data brokers, these are companies that vacuum up your personal data from all corners of the internet and sell it to anyone who wants to buy it. So let's talk about today's sponsor, Incogni. There are many ways to take back control of your sensitive information from data brokers, but we recommend Incogni, and you can use the link in the description or the code LegalEagle for an exclusive 60% discount. Incogni removes your personal data from online data brokers by doing all the legwork for you. They reach out directly and force data brokers to take down your personal info. If those data brokers resist, Incogni will take care of that too, because Incogni fights back. Incogni also just launched a new feature called Custom Removals for subscribers to their unlimited plan, which is really cool. It allows you to flag an unlimited number of sites where your data is exposed, and you can even have Incogni's privacy experts review and tackle the most uncooperative data brokers and people search sites. The data brokers are the reason why, in the US, you can search your name and find a bunch of websites that will give anyone your home address, phone number, and extensive history. It's shocking just how easy it is to find all this information. It also might be why you're getting so many spam calls lately, or even how someone might steal your identity. Incogni is a great way to take back control of your data, increase your online privacy, and cut down on those annoying scam calls and emails that used to flood our voicemails and inboxes. And Incogni will continue to conduct ongoing removals because even if the broker removes your data once, they can collect it again. Incogni makes sure your personal information stays off the market for good. So if online privacy is important to you, give Incogni a try. If you click the link on screen or below, you can try Incogni risk-free for 30 days and get a full refund if you're not into it. And if you keep it, you'll still get the exclusive 60% discount, so long as you use our link or the code LegalEagle, all one word. Because nobody wants to end up on a list during any kind of not purge, which, for the employees of the Justice Department, continued under Bovee with even more high-profile firings in June. And that wasn't the only partisan investigation Bovee spearheaded. He was also a major driver of the effort to claw back EPA funds for green energy projects. We talked about this in the videos on the short tenure of Ed Martin, Trump's first pick to be the U.S. attorney in D.C. See, under the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act, Congress allocated $27 billion in greenhouse gas reduction funds to be parked with nonprofits and doled out as loans or grants to finance environmental projects in partnership with private businesses and nonprofits. But then a right-wing influencer published secretly recorded video of a low-level EPA staffer talking about pushing money out the door, like throwing gold bars off the Titanic.
It truly feels like we're on the Titanic or throwing like gold bars off the hatch.
That staffer wasn't even talking about the green bank funds, but EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin vowed to seize all the money sitting in the nonprofit's bank account, waiting to subsidize heat pumps for rural Americans and fund solar and geothermal projects. Bovee and Martin first demanded that Denise Chung, the top criminal prosecutor in the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C., open a case against the nonprofits. Chung, a 24-year veteran of the Justice Department, said there was no probable cause to think that a crime had been committed, and eventually she quit rather than do it. And remember, Ed Martin wasn't a criminal lawyer, but Bovee was. He knows what constitutes probable cause, and he knew they didn't have it here. But hey, don't take my word for it. Take the word of the magistrate who told Martin to take a hike when he tried to get a warrant to seize those funds. But that didn't stop Bovee, who shopped this dog of a case to several other U.S. attorneys' offices around the country, apparently hoping to get some prosecutor to bite. Meanwhile, Bovee was blowing up the corruption prosecution of New York City Mayor Eric Adams in spectacular fashion. On February 10th, Emil Bovee sent a letter to Danielle Sassoon, the acting U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, instructing her to drop the corruption case against New York Mayor Eric Adams. He explained that the prosecution has restricted Mayor Adams' ability to devote full attention and resources to the illegal immigration and violent crime that escalated under the policies of the prior administration. He ordered Sassoon to dismiss the case without prejudice so that it could be refiled anytime the White House decided Adams wasn't cooperating enough with the Trump administration's immigration plans. Now remember, Bovee had just spent 2 years accusing the White House of inappropriately directing the prosecution of Donald Trump. But as soon as he got into power, he ordered the government to drop a criminal case to help the White House enforce its political and policy priorities. Sassoon refused to do it. She sent a letter to Attorney General Bondi laying out all the ways that offering a quid pro quo to an elected politician was a violation of legal ethics. It also violates the DOJ's own policies and the New York Code of Professional Conduct for Lawyers, particularly when, as here, the president wanted to retain the right to re-indict that politician any time he didn't do what they wanted. Bovee's response was downright deranged. He accused Sassoon of violating her oath of office by daring to refuse an order from the Attorney General to carry out the president's policy. He ranted that he was putting her deputies on leave and instigating a professional misconduct investigation against them, and he defended the propriety of subordinating a criminal case to the president's political and policy priorities. If the American Bar Association was still in the business of vetting judicial candidates, they would likely say that this indicates a lack of respect for the judicial process and a temperament that is fundamentally incompatible with judicial service. May or may not be why AG Bondi announced in June that none of Donald Trump's judicial nominees would submit to ABA evaluation going forward. On June 24th, the day before Bovee appeared before the Senate Judiciary Committee for his nomination hearing, the New York Times published a whistleblower report by Erez Ruveni, a former DOJ immigration lawyer who was fired in April for supposed insubordination. Ruveni's most provocative allegation is that Bovee ordered the Justice Department lawyers to say F you to federal judges and defy court orders. Ruveni says that Bovee worked with the White House to ensure that no court would have time to stop him renditioning hundreds of Venezuelan men to a gulag in El Salvador. Specifically, if the president issues a proclamation under the Alien Enemies Act declaring that the country is being invaded, he can expel those invaders without going through the regular deportation process. Since Trump issued this proclamation on March 15th, multiple courts have blocked it, pointing out that we are not, in fact, being invaded by Venezuela, which is why Bovee was intent on getting the supposed gang members onto planes before the proclamation was invoked, ensuring that it was too late for them to seek judicial review. Ruveni says, at the meeting on March 14th, Bovey indicated to those in attendance that the AEA proclamation would soon be signed and that one or more planes containing individuals subject to the AEA would be taking off over the weekend. Bovey then made a remark concerning the possibility that a court order would enjoin those removals before they could be effectuated. Bovey stated that DOJ would need to consider telling the courts "fuck you" and ignore any such court order. And that's more or less what happened. At a hearing on March 15th, Judge James Boasberg issued an order saying no detainees subject to the AEA could be deported, after which he asked Justice Department lawyer Drew Ensign point blank if other AEA flights were planned for that weekend, and Ensign said, "I don't know the answer to that question," despite the fact that he'd been in the same meeting with Ruveni and Bovey the day before when Bovey said those flights absolutely, positively had to take off that weekend. And during a brief pause in the hearing, those flights did take off. So if Ruveni is correct, Bovey told these guys to defy a court order, and then they did. When the judge demanded that they explain how such a thing could have happened, Bovey is the one who retconned the theory that Judge Boasberg's oral order from the bench didn't count until it was memorialized in writing an hour later. Plus, he said that Judge Boasberg lost jurisdiction because the plane left U.S. airspace, which is malarkey. Remember, Bovey is a prosecutor who indicted Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. But because the White House really wanted to deport these guys, he was willing to pretend to believe that U.S. courts have no reach beyond American shores. That's ridiculous, which is one reason why Bovey himself refused to sign a pleading saying that. Another reason Bovey was probably leery was that if only the boss is willing to put his name on a DOJ filing, it's a tacit admission that no one lower on the food chain was willing to do it. That's why every legal reporter in America flagged it when Bovey personally signed the motion for dismissal in the Eric Adams case. And not for nothing, but if Bovey inserted himself into the AEA case by signing a filing, he'd come into Judge Boasberg's ambit and risk getting asked about his role. Ruveni refused to do it, so eventually Ensign was forced to walk the plank and tell Judge Boasberg to his face that oral orders don't count, which went about as well as you'd think. What are the odds we're going to wind up making a video about Ensign real soon? Ruveni wanted to disseminate the judge's orders to the Department of Homeland Security with an explanation of what the agency should and should not do to comply with the court. But he says that Bovey was working hand in glove with the White House to ensure that there was no paper trail. So if federal agencies got caught defying court orders, as they did multiple times, they'd be able to claim that they were simply unaware of the court's ruling. Who knew? Not us. On March 28th, Ruveni learned that DHS was directed by someone within the administration unknown to Mr. Ruveni not to issue guidance to its officers concerning the fact of and terms of an injunction issued by Judge Brian Murphy in Massachusetts. There, the court ordered the Department of Homeland Security to stop renditioning detainees to third countries, that is, not their country of origin, without opportunity to protest in court. But on March 29th, DHS flew 17 detainees to the U.S. base in Guantanamo Bay and handed them over to the Department of Defense, which took them to El Salvador to be locked up in the notorious Sikot prison. Judge Murphy demanded that the government explain who defied his order, and Ruveni sent multiple frantic emails to attorneys at DHS, the Defense Department, and in DOJ leadership trying to figure that out. But on April 1, he got a call from Assistant Attorney General Yakov Roth, who told him to stop asking questions because Bovey was very unhappy that Mr. Ruveni had contacted counsel at various agencies to ascertain whether DOJ had violated the court order. Roth conveyed that Mr. Ruveni should stop emailing agency counsel on the matter and to communicate instead by phone only where possible. Basically, Ruveni says that Bovey wanted to run the DOJ in accordance with the Stringer Bell rule.
Is you taking notes on a criminal conspiracy? What the is you thinking?
But if you're concerned about taking notes so that no court can ever see them, maybe you're actually engaged in a conspiracy instead of the even-handed administration of justice. At the beginning of Bovey's confirmation hearing, Senate Judiciary Chair Chuck Grassley warbled that the whistleblower complaint was nothing more than a smear campaign by Democrats. Bovey told Senator Alex Padilla that he plumb forgot how many people he'd fired for working on January 6 cases. He dodged Senator Sheldon Whitehouse's questions about his role in the bungled EPA investigation that led to the departure of Denise Chung. And he couldn't remember, but did not deny that he'd instructed DOJ prosecutors to defy a court order.
Senator, I have no recollection of saying anything of that kind.
He also refused to admit if he'd talked to White House advisor Stephen Miller about the deportation flights.
As a lawyer, among other reasons, privileges tend to fall when misconduct is alleged.
Remember, this is a guy who claimed to be shocked that there would be communications with the White House about pending cases. Democrats were furious, including New Jersey Senator Cory Booker, who all but accused Bovee of perjuring himself at the hearing. But Republicans fell all over themselves to praise him, and so it seems pretty likely that Bovee will be trading his not a henchman shirt for judicial robes pretty soon. Thanks, Chief Justice Roberts.
Thank you again. Thank you again. Won't forget.
Thanks, Liz. And it's important to remember that when you get assigned a terrible judge who might be a henchman for the president, that's when you need a great lawyer the most. Now, after I started this channel, every week I'd get hundreds of comments and emails from viewers who are dealing with legal problems. And they'd ask, can you help me find a lawyer? Or how do I know if this attorney is any good? And there's a massive gap in our justice system. It's that people don't know how to find the right lawyer for their specific situation. They're scared, they're overwhelmed, and they end up doing nothing or hiring the first attorney who calls them back. And that really bothered me. So I started to wonder, what if there was a different way? What if we could build a law firm that actually lived up to the values that I talk about on this channel? Transparency, accessibility, and putting clients first instead of chasing billable hours. A firm where you don't need to pay anything up front and your lawyers only get paid if you do, to maximize your opportunity for justice. So a few years ago, I decided to fix that problem. I decided to start my own personal injury law firm. And honestly, it wasn't an easy choice. But I realized I was in this unique position. I had this platform, this community, and the experience. Not to get rich, trust me, there are easier ways to make money than starting a law practice. But we did it because access to justice shouldn't be a luxury, because finding the right legal representation shouldn't feel like playing Russian roulette with your future. And when you work with my firm, you're not just getting a lawyer. You're getting a team that understands that behind every case is a real person with real stakes. If we can't represent you, or you're in a state where we don't practice, we'll take the time to try to match you with an attorney in my personal network of lawyers, a national network of some of the best lawyers in the country who actually specialize in what you're going through, located right where you are, not just whoever happens to be available. So if you're dealing with a personal injury, a car crash, a data breach, sexual harassment, a Social Security or workers' comp issue, give us a call at the number on screen or click on the link below. Now, I can't represent everyone that watches this channel. I wish I could, but what I can do is make sure that when you need legal help, you have somewhere to turn to that you can trust. So whether it's me handling your case or the incredible attorneys we partnered with, you'll get the same principles of honesty and education that we bring to every video. And if you're dealing with a legal issue and you're not sure where to start, check out the link in the description. Let's have a conversation about how we can help you find not just a lawyer, but the right lawyer for your situation. Because at the end of the day, that's what this is all about, making sure that when life gets complicated, you don't have to face it alone. Which is why when you need a lawyer, you don't just need a legal team, you need the Eagle team.